Hello everyone, it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of VetChat, the number one veterinary podcast. And I'm super pleased, I'm privileged to have Dr. Dave Nicol on the line with me. It's not often that I can say that I look more sartorially elegant than Dave, because he's always well kitted out. Those of you who are listening will have no idea what I'm talking about. Those on the vodcast will see that he's casually dressed in a t-shirt, jumper sort of ensemble, but just still looks devilishly handsome and amazing. So as you always do, Dave, great to have you on the podcast. I know how busy you are, so thanks so much for spending some time for us to have a chat together.
Massive pleasure, Anthony. Thank you very much for having me.
I know it would be hard to believe that there will be people on the podcast who maybe don't know you. I mean, accolades aplenty. VMX Speaker of the Year. I think this year you've been Speaker of the Year previously at VMX, which is a massive achievement given the number of speakers that they have there. And, you know, I remember us sort of going back to about 2009, 2010. You were doing blogs. I was doing online pharmacy. I had a nice website for my veterinary practice, starting to think about webinars. Actually, that was 2010. But in some ways, we've had a similar sort of path in that interest in technology. But obviously, not everybody knows that journey. So perhaps if you start by telling us a little bit about your journey, you know, as a vet and now as a leader in sort of veterinary practice management and leadership training.
Yeah, and do you know what? I'll probably start that by telling you about my earliest memory of you, I think, actually, because I'm pretty sure I'd come back from Australia where I'd just recently begun living, and I had a consulting client very helpfully in the United Kingdom, and I came back and was doing a bit of work with them, and I said, look, you should come up to I think it was a VPMA conference. It was still that back then.
Yes.
And she said, okay, I will come up and we'll go do that. And so the three of us went up there, and I wanted to sort of introduce her and get her really head into management and leadership a bit more. And I remember standing around at the bar area after one of the talks, and I wasn't speaking. Like I was nobody. Like I wasn't on any bill or on anybody's radar as a speaker. And I was sort of sitting there looking around going, oh, it'd be great to do some speaking. And then I saw this giant of a man with like snow white hair, just carving through the crowd, schmoozing and working the room and handing out leaflets. And I think I've still got the leaflet actually. And it was a leaflet for one of your webinars, and you just started Webinar Vet. It was right at the sort of inception of it. And then you know, you got like 6,000 or 9,000 people on a webinar for one, and everyone's like, holy crap, like those things are kicking off. It's such a, you know, so you're right at the inception of that, which was super fun. But so that's kind of like a fun memory, which I always think of when I think of you. And just that sort of hustle and the entrepreneurship and the, you know, the ability to get things up and running. And it was a really, you know, I think it was an interesting time because digital media had just really gotten going, you know, and I'd had a big interest in, you know, I'd been writing blogs since 2001 when or maybe even 2000 when we, you know, the practice I joined in Southeast London, the owner there, Graham Peck, was very into digital media. And we actually started a little company, ridiculous company doing usability testing for vet practice websites when nobody even had a website, you know. But we started writing email newsletters and blogs, and we used this thing to really build park vets in Southeast London, a really good standing in the local community. And then social media kind of came along, and then I sort of wrote a book on social media for vets or for practice owners called, you know, The Yellow Pages Are Dead, which was a bit controversial at the time. And
I remember that. But you were right.
Right. And I was writing a blog as well because you know, moving to Australia to work there for a year. I'd been a leader in a practice in Southeast London. I'd worked as a business coach with Brendan Robinson at Village Vets, just going around and helping him, you know, work on his practices. And I just didn't want to lose connection with the UK market. And I thought, well, let's
Mm.
just write and just publish and write and write and write, just stay connected. So when I come back a year later, there's still people haven't forgotten. I've not fallen off the face of the earth. And 1 year turned into 7 years. And, as life does, you go in a slightly different direction to what you intended. And
Yeah.
it's a longer pathway to get there. But so many fun things along the way to talk about.
And you did some fantastic stuff in Australia, because I think we stayed in quite close contact. Did you set up a practice, or did you end up working in a practice?
All of the above. So I worked in a practice for about 18 months when I went there, and
Mm.
once it became clear, my then wife got a very senior job for Microsoft, and it was the sort of job you just don't turn down.
Mm.
So that 1 year was, I was going to come back, and that 1 year became 7 years. And when we were going to stay, I decided a long time ago I was going to, I wanted to outright own my own practice and do things a bit differently. So I found a real beater practice in Sydney, which, the most important aspect of it was affordable. I didn't have a lot of
Yeah.
money. And not being from Australia, nobody's going to loan you a ton of money if you're,
Yeah.
if you're not from an area. So I scraped together a little bit of money, and there was this practice on the market called North Ryde Vet Hospital, and I got in touch with the owner, and I was looking at it, and I spoke to a few of my friends and colleagues around Sydney, and I just didn't. They were all like, "No, don't do it because it's going to be demolished, and it's on the edge of an industrial estate, and it's the last few cottages of housing on the edge of this industrial estate. It's not going to be there in a year." And I just thought, you know what, the price is everything here. If it's not going to be there in a year, I need to be able to purchase it, run it, operate it, learn what I need to learn to be a better consultant. That's why I wanted to own it. I didn't want to
Yeah.
advise people things I'd not done myself, um, and and build it up. And in actual fact, then I'd gotten my first speaking gig across in the United States alongside doing that, and I was really stressed out about doing that. 6 hours of content in front of a US audience, and I just thought, who the hell am I to be doing that? Massive imposter syndrome kicking off there, and it was just a bit overwhelming. And I was like, I think I'm out. I don't think I'm going to buy this. And then I met so many cool people there, and they're all like, just buy it. And I sat down there, and I'd had a few drinks at the bar, and I thought, you know what, I should just do this. And I messaged the guy that was selling it, George Kaplan, Dr. George Kaplan, wonderful guy. And I just said, look, if you're still selling it, the deadline for the purchase had passed. And he said, yep, I am. And we met, and we made a deal, and it went from there. So I owned a practice, and then I opened one from scratch as well. Um, so I've done it all really in vet med.
And that's the amazing thing. And you obviously, what's really powerful is when you talk about something and you actually do it, because it's really easy. Talk is cheap. We can all, I
Mm.
could be a consultant on practice management, but, I run successful as, I ran a practice that did okay, but it wasn't like super, super successful. You've obviously expanded as well. And that's what's really powerful. And I think that's why you're listened to, because you walk your talk, don't you?
Yeah, and I think that's part. I mean, I think it's the accent as well in America. To be honest, Anthony, it's like I'm not
Yes.
sure anyone understands what I'm saying, but they just think it sounds lovely, so they keep showing up.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I do. I care deeply about this profession. I care deeply about the people in it. I care,
Hmm.
especially deeply about the people I'm privileged to work with on my teams. And I see the pain that's in veterinary medicine, and it's not fun to look at. It's been
Yeah.
a I don't know your experience. I get the sense you've had a great experience in veterinary medicine as well, and it's not all roses. There are hard things to deal with and do, but it was a wonderful 17 years in practice,
Yeah.
and I look back so fondly, and I miss it. I'm doing this because I wanted to do this even more than have
Yeah.
to stop doing that, and I just wish more people could experience that version of veterinary medicine. And I think there's a few reasons why they're not, and some of those are in our control and some of those are not in our control. But to see so many
Yeah.
people struggling and grappling with it and not succeeding, the struggle and the grapple's great, But
Yes,
the stopping and the giving up, or the burning
is
out,
not so
I
good.
don't think that's okay, and that's what
Yeah.
motivates me now to help people.
Just for people who are listening, this will be transcribed and we will translate it so that people in America and elsewhere in the world can understand it. So if you've stayed this far, and you're watching it as a recording, you should be able to see the translation underneath into English.
Bless you. That's very kind of you. Thank you, Anthony.
No, you speak very clearly. You have a very good voice. You're an excellent speaker. Obviously, the Americans must understand a bit to make you Speaker of the Year. Although it is always good to go to America with a British accent, and at least once on your trip here, I love your English accent, or your Scottish accent, or your British accent. They are such kind people, the Americans, aren't they?
I adore my trips over there. America's been, it's funny. It gets a bad rap, and there's certain elements of American culture or society that are very hard for us to fathom as British people, and the same
Yeah,
is true in reverse.
yeah,
Um, but I have made so like the funny thing is you go through life and there's circles of friends, and I think this is really important because connection is really important, and that's maybe what's one of the struggles for veterinary medicine
yeah,
now. And you've got your school friends, your university friends, your first group of work colleagues are a very
yeah,
important part of your peer network. And then as you move into leadership, it becomes a much lonelier journey, and you have
yeah,
to work harder at that network because it's you leading a team, and you're not friends. You can be cordial, but you're going to
yeah.
have to be the one carrying the can. You're paying everybody. You're the one that's going to make the popular and the unpopular decisions, and that's a much lonelier path to walk than it is as an assistant associate
Mm,
doctor. So I found another group of friends in management here in the
yes,
UK, but also, I was taken under the wing by the John Sheridans, Rita Dingwalls, yourself, um, and then Australia, a group of friends and peers out there. And then I moved back here, and because it was quite nomadic, it's almost like I didn't belong anywhere
yeah,
and also belonged everywhere. And it's a sort of slightly odd existence. But my speaking circle of friends and my community of friends America became very important, and then COVID happened, and it was just all cut off. So those
yeah,
2 years were just really really hard. But such dear friends, and I adore my trips across there, and I've learned so much and experienced so much. It's a second home, and it's
yeah.
the positives far outweigh the negatives for me.
Well, I think they are, and we can talk about the challenges of veterinary medicine, in the UK and US and other countries,
Mm,
possibly. And, obviously times change, but there is a positive mindset. And I think I worry sometimes that we talk ourselves into a depression and into this is a really bad job. Whereas actually, I wanted to be a vet from when I was 8. I've just come back from our inspection at my school. It was in that schoolyard where one of the lads stood on a sparrow, killed it, and I thought, had I been a vet, I could have saved it. So
yeah,
from the age of 8, wanted to be a vet. And of course, it's challenging, but it's not easy to do a triathlon. But that doesn't mean that you don't do it. It means that you work hard at it. You practice. You get better. You get to the standard you're getting to. Which is almost international level, um, and that only happens because you're prepared to practice. And it was really interesting. I was doing a podcast with 2 young vets, now 10 years qualified, and I have a little bit of a theory that if you get over the first 5 years
mm,
and you put yourself about and you learn, then it becomes really interesting. But that first 5 years can be tough because, as with
undoubtedly.
any job, new job, it's always stressful. We come out of college and we don't know a huge amount. And we learn then in the job, don't we? And we make our mistakes in, the first job or two. Um, you find the right practice for yourself. And I think if you can get over that 5 year hump, then things go a lot better. And this was what the 2 young women that I was talking to recently were talking about as well.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony, I look back, I was as dumb as a rock. We were talking before we started recording. Went to vet school age 17, graduated age 22. barely know what do you know about life, emotional
Yeah,
intelligence, anything at that point in time. Of course, you think you know it all, which is half the problem.
yeah,
Um, and to an extent, you almost need to have a bit of that bluster and bravado to do what we do. The
mm,
opposite of that is no self-esteem and no ego and no ability
yeah,
to no you don't you will feel like you don't belong. That imposterism will eat you alive if you're at the opposite end of the
yeah,
spectrum. But up at the other end is just all hubris and nonsense and rubbish
yeah,
and bluster and hot air, and that's called pretending in another
mm,
way. And that's, it's another version of imposter. How do you deal with it? Do you shrink away or do you step up to it? But you're dead right. Like I remember looking back, and I do think this is an important thing for any younger vets to do is, you always feel that's the curse of Dunning-Kruger, or the Dunning-Kruger's effect is you don't know where you are on the curve. And the longer you stick at something and the more you practice, as long as you're practicing the right things, and you've got good mentors and support, you will be getting better. But it's very hard to realize that until you intentionally look back. And I think that's such a valuable skill to be able to look back. And I remember looking back at 1 year and 3 years and 5 years. And 5 years was the point where I thought, actually, I think I've got the hang of this by now. And I do think that I didn't have any different expectation, Anthony. I didn't expect to be good in a year. I didn't expect it to be great.
no,
I was still having stress dreams and getting treated for bronchopneumonia because I was like, my immune system was run down, and I remember several times being on antibiotics because I just couldn't shake colds, and it was all stress from that first year in practice. But I was supported well, and I was in a
yeah.
quality practice. I had good mentors and support around me. It was just, it is a demanding job mentally,
Yes.
physically. It's
That's what
hard.
makes it exciting as well, though, isn't it? Because if it was easy,
Well, anyone could
we
do it.
there are jobs out there that are 9 to 5. You step in at 9, you leave at 5. But for me, being a vet was all about, it's vocational.
Yeah.
I loved people, I loved animals. I also cared about the planet, and I
Mm,
kind of saw that all of that was kind of
yeah.
connected.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I would love to tell you that I had. I mean, it is vocational. I fell in love with veterinary medicine. The old cliches of James Herriot, and I did grow up in the countryside, and going around and the large animal vets on summer calls was terrific. But what I loved
Mm,
was the interactions with the people.
yeah,
Straight right away, it was as a 13-year-old boy going in and standing on the edge of that vet room exam room table and looking up as this goddess Pamela Chapman was doing her magic with these endless hordes of crazy people, it seemed. And I just remember being fascinated. This is like a soap opera playing out in front of me, and I
yeah.
thought, this is amazing. I'm in. And 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 the medicine and the thinking and all the problem solving, all were skills that had to get bolted on. It was just a fascination with people, and the farmers were brilliant, and the equine people were a law unto themselves, and it was just like, wow, life's going to be really interesting in this job.
Well, I don't think, in practice you ever quite have the same day twice, do you?
No, and there's times when I really wished I would have had the same day twice,
Yeah.
and there's times I couldn't have. Wish I would never have seen that day again. But I always was grateful for the variety that was coming through the door, and that's a stress as well. Like if it's uncontrolled variety and you don't feel like you can handle it, then that can be
Mm,
overwhelming. But once you build your skills, and I do think skill development is the key to having a happy, successful, emotionally and financially,
mm.
career. And the more skill you gain, the more the variety becomes a benefit, not a curse, because you're
Well,
like,
this is
cool, something new that I can still
Yeah, I
handle.
mean, the vision, for Webinar Vet was very much to have the world's most competent vets. I was a GP,
Mm,
did a bit of dermatology.
yep.
Um, and when we set it up, we said, look, if you watch a webinar and you learn one thing and you take that into clinical practice, that makes you a better vet. Before webinars, it would cost me 5 grand a year to do my training. And I saw 35 hours as a target rather than as a minimum.
Mm,
Now I see people doing, 100 hours on our platform. That has to make them a better vet, provided they're looking at it. We've got the quizzes, etc. And I think if you're more confident, as you say, if you're skilled up, now obviously we don't do the practical skills as much, but it's very much if you walk into that room and you've got an idea fairly on what's wrong with it and how you can solve that, that is actually a really satisfying place to be, isn't it? And
Yeah.
then I do think stress goes down because you feel like you, as you've said, you're in control of your situation. You're not necessarily going to get it right every time,
Yeah.
but you're going to get it right more times than you get it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said a really important word there as well, and stress. And stress, I think, there's certain things we've painted as the enemy, clients and stress, and I don't think either are
Yeah,
the enemy.
yeah,
Unhappy clients are certainly not a lot of fun,
yeah,
and stress, uncontrolled, prolonged stress in which you cannot see a way out of is certainly not fun and not good for you.
yeah,
But it's we talk about work life balance. I hate that phrase because it's like pitting work
yeah,
against life, and I think it's personal work, personal life, work life balance. They're both life,
yeah,
but stress is a necessity of it's a necessary part of the journey to excellence. It's
yeah,
load balancing your stress with your ability to recover from that stress, and that means resolving your
yeah,
stress before you
yeah,
load on some more stress, which again is very similar to the athlete's journey of, okay, I'm going to stress my body not too much because that gets me fatigued, too fatigued or
and
injured,
injured.
but not too
Yeah,
little or I plateau. Like we were talking about park run, and
yeah,
there's certain barriers that's very hard to overcome. If you're just going out and you run 5 or 10 kilometers the same pace every single day, you'll fatigue because it's
yeah,
boring, but you'll plateau. So you'll mentally
yeah,
fatigue because it's boring, and you'll plateau in your performance. Versus
yeah,
if you run really slow on your runs, and then you go hell for leather another run, and then you do something that's more race pace 3 times a week, you'll start smashing your targets, and you won't
mm,
mentally fatigue. So the analogy into veterinary medicine of how do you control your stress so that it's balanced and so that you've got the opportunity to challenge yourself and push outside of that comfort zone without
mm,
breaking. That's the challenge I see as a leader, as a practice owner, of creating
yeah.
environments where that challenge can happen and people can get their downtime to recover and think about it and reflect, and then the growth can happen. That's what we're not doing on mass, though.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the point you made there. It's about chronic stress that gets worse and worse because you keep on building on it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got acute stress, I've just been doing or being inspect or my school that I'm a governor at has been inspected and I had to do an interview. Of course, that's a bit stressful, but it's stressful because I care. I want to do my best there, and similarly with the running and things. For some reason, we vets, we all like to go out for a run. And I used to find it was a way at the end of an evening surgery to kind of unload.
Yeah.
I'd go out for a run, get rid of that sort of, because the small animal vet job isn't necessarily as physical as obviously a large animal vet.
Right.
So sometimes just getting out, running, talking through with yourself some of those clients that maybe were a bit challenging or cases that were a bit challenging, it brought it all back into perspective. And then, as you've said, you brought that stress level back to, it's a resting thing.
Yeah.
But stress is important. It shows we care.
It does. I think I would be much more worried if I was no longer stressed, because then and that's possibly where you end up getting to when you go through a healthy point where you just don't care, you don't feel anything anymore.
Yeah,
That's a really dangerous place to go. I like you said a thing there that again I think triggered another thought, and that is, we talk about coping mechanisms. Again, the language is just really negative there
yeah,
versus actually it's what you're describing. When I think about what I used to do, yeah, I would go to the gym, but oftentimes we'd also, a group of us colleagues at the practice, we'd go to the pub on a Friday night or a
yeah,
Saturday night, and we'd tell the most ridiculous stories. And I am certain, like when you see groups of people at bars at veterinary events, and they're not talking about how awesome they are, they're talking about how epic what they're comparing the size of the biggest screw ups they've ever had in their career and laughing about it because they're
yeah,
drawing the lessons. it's it's not coping, it's processing. Like, what's your processing mechanism to be able to take what you've experienced,
mm,
process it, and then think, okay, well, what I take from that to be better, or what I need to change in order to make this sustainable for me. I think that
Yeah.
works macro and micro.
I was at Stephen May's retirement do at the RVC
Mm,
this week. I think it was this week, maybe last week. And Stephen was very big into reflection,
hmm.
which I know a lot of vets go, oh. But actually, we learn through reflection, whether we realize we're doing it or not.
Yeah,
Um, and I suppose what you're saying there is actually, which is something I think I've got clever as I've got older because I've committed to be a lifelong learner.
yeah,
And actually, all that means is that when you do something and it's a screw up, if you reflect on it, you're less likely to do it again. If you don't think about it, there's every chance that 3 months down the line you do the same thing, and then that does get frustrating because you kind of think I'm not learning and I'm not developing. So I think for me, lifelong learning is essential. I think as vets or nurses, if we decide that we know it all, that is kind of almost the beginning of death, isn't it? Or losing interest in the profession.
yeah, and that's, I think you're describing that sort of fixed mindset that really is a unhelpful place and does tend to be quite associated with higher levels of imposterism and burnout versus that
Mhm.
more um, I'm in the dojo, I'm learning, openness to the possibility that you're wrong or that failure is an option. Indeed, it's a necessity if you're going to get good at anything. It's like how answering the question of how do I fail in a way that I can capture the lessons without, and you do grow scars. It's called character. Who
Yeah,
wants it's called weathering. Let's call it weathering, Anthony.
yeah,
Wisdom is weathering. Skills are acquired through that weathering process. So there's nothing inherently wrong in it. It's very normal. What you've got to do is make sure that you don't have the sort of failure that's catastrophic for you and that you
yeah,
can't handle. And some of that is the situation, and some of that is your own ego and identity, and how vulnerable that is to the effects of knowing that you've failed. And that seems to be a big stumbling point because a lot of people in veterinary medicine have that fixed mindset where they've been pushed themselves so hard. They've used a strategy to get to vet school that was very, very successful at school, where it wasn't really ambiguous. Education is not really ambiguous. You're going to show up, go to class A, B, C. You're going to have an exam on this day. If you read these past papers and study your ass off enough, you're going to pass. If you've got enough up there, you're going to pass.
mm,
Vet school's really no different to that. The stakes feel higher, perhaps, than when you and I went to vet school because there's more money on the line.
yeah,
Um, but when you get into practice, that strategy stops working because the rules completely change, and now you're in this ambiguous um, place where nobody. Now it's all on you. Your responsibility in this ambiguous world, um, and stuff bleeds. It doesn't just look like it looks in the book, and clients are, you know, not playing the way we want them to play, and we've got to talk about money, and all these suddenly variables kick in, and that requires us to change our way, which is very hard when you've got a fixed mindset. It's hard to break out of that, but that's what's required. It's that openness to change and to um, be willing to fail, but finding a home. And I think this goes whether you're a new vet or you're like I'm doing triathlon, and that's new for me. And every step in my career, I took on every 3 or 4 years, I took on a new skill set to grow or develop, where I became essentially a clueless monkey again. And I had to find mentors, and I just got better at the learning process as I got older. And so it's managing the learning weathering process with s- challenges that are just outside your comfort zone, mentors to help manage your mindset and make sure you're telling yourself the right stories, and just actively managing your own mindset a little bit as well, so that you're not just in that state of negativity, so that you're then able to cope and to move forward. And then by golly, you look back in a year or 2 years and you think, actually, I've come a really long way here, and I don't
yeah,
suck, and I do belong. And there's so many parallels between what I'm doing in triathlon and sport. And I said to my coach this year, I really felt like a bit of an imposter in this sport. You show up on the start line to these events, and everyone looks either confident or super serious, or they're joking like they've been there for forever. And you think, am I the only one that is absolutely shitting their pants here? Excuse my French. And I'm going to drown on the swim, or I'm going to fall off and crash my bike. And then the race goes how the race is going to go. And after a season and a half of doing it, I suddenly, this is going to sound really dumb actually, I didn't really understand what a seasoned professional was. Like I thought it was some cooking reference or something like that. And then I did a season, 2 seasons in the triathlon. I thought, oh, it means you've done a couple of literally seasons and now you're a seasoned athlete. And I said to my coach, I didn't quite accomplish my objectives this year. But one of the things that I didn't have as an objective, but I think it's the most important thing I took away was I feel like I belong now. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
part of this race. I'm part of it. And I don't look or feel any different on the start line, but I know everyone else is thinking the same thing as me, and this is normal. And I think
Mm.
that is true in veterinary medicine as well. So when you're worrying about whether you fit or not, just do. Just do.
Yeah. And I think the beauty of the career, we come from, doing GCSEs, A levels, university, and that curriculum is very
Yeah.
set. And
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
really, there's not much fluidity to it. It's pretty rigid.
Yeah.
The minute you qualify, we're very blessed because even with the medics, I think there's still a lot of rigidity after they qualify. We can set our own curriculum.
Mm.
You decided to become a practice management guru. I've gone into postgraduate education. I did dermatology. I had a first opinion practice. I ran an online pharmacy for a short time until I discovered webinars. That being able to change is also, for me, I think, as the character that I am, that variety was also important because
Mm.
I think if you
Yeah.
are doing the same thing forever, some people, that's absolutely great and they'll cope with that. I did need, as you've said, doing triathlons, etc. It's challenging yourself, trying new things, isn't it?
100%. And yeah, I think you and I are cut from similar cloth. And I say, like, I'm a entrepreneur trapped in a vet's body. I just didn't know what that word meant. But if I look back
Yeah,
across my whole life, actually, it's you're a problem solver who's building a business around a problem they've seen and trying to fix it and make the world a
yeah,
better place. And I think that I recognize that in the work that you do, certainly central to the work that I do. um, and and that fits for us. But there are so many, there's so much variety in veterinary medicine that is just the beauty of it. And I was going to say there's a lot of diversity of thinking and brains, and there's not enough diversity in many other ways in veterinary medicine. But it's got, there's a home for everybody in this profession, and it's a
yeah,
matter of playing the pick and mix and not giving up on this place, but working on ourselves. And that goes for leaders as well. Sometimes I say that people are like, yo, it's how can I work myself in this crap system? And that's true. There's some crap systems out there. But my work is partly about helping leaders create better systems and places for people
yeah.
to ply their trade, and helping the vets and the nurses in veterinary medicine work up there on the systems internally that they can have to build the foundation to grow a great clinical or otherwise career. Because it's one thing's for sure, Anthony, as far as I can see, whatever any of us decides to do with our lives, to get good at something and to really rock the socks at something, it is going to involve us struggling, suffering, and enduring pain. I don't
Mm,
see any other way in order to get good at something. And what I do know about veterinary professionals are that they want to be good, and they are good.
mm,
Um, so why not make it veterinary medicine? Because the struggle is going to be there wherever, but the struggle is not bad. The struggle is amazing if you've got the balance between that
yeah.
stress and that rest, right?
We could probably chat for another hour, and in fact, we must do a second podcast
Well, we will,
at
Anthony.
some.
I want you to come on Blunt Dissection, so we'll have a as long as you want.
Yeah, no, that's definite because I'd love to come on that. And you're an inspirational figure for me. The stuff that you've done in your career, helping people. I think if we can help, 1, 2, 10 people it makes it all worthwhile. Doing the job as a leader in the profession, and I'm sure you've helped many more than 10 people. So thanks for all you do for the profession.
Thank you, Anthony, and same right back at you, sir.
Thanks everyone for listening. This has been VetChat. Hope to see you on a podcast or a webinar very soon. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.